Welcome back to the deep dive. We spend a lot of time on this show looking at really big ideas.
Huge ideas. Yeah.
Right, complex theories, massive historical events, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But today we are going to look at something that is essentially the invisible scaffolding of thought itself.
I like that phrase, invisible scaffolding.
Yeah, and I'm talking directly to you, the listener, right now. The person who just loves to learn.
The lifelong learner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The person who wants to gain this thorough knowledge without feeling, completely overwhelmed by an avalanche of information.
Because it can get overwhelming.
It really
Yeah.
can. But you are the kind of person who wants to understand the why and the how behind the way things work. And today's source material is going to give you exactly that.
Oh, absolutely.
But in a realm you might not expect. We are looking at a foundational classical text on Arabic grammar and syntax.
It's a fascinating subject. And I know the word grammar might instantly make some people think of dusty chalkboards.
Tedious memorization.
Right. Tedious memorization in high school language classes that felt, more like punishment than actual learning.
For sure. Yeah.
But if you are coming into this with that mindset, I really want you to throw it out the window right now. That's entirely the wrong framework for what we're about to explore today.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission of this deep dive is to decode what I like to call the operating system of the Arabic language.
Operating system, yes.
Because if you think about it like computer science, we are just looking at the user interface here.
No, not at all.
This is not a phrase book for ordering coffee. It's about understanding the highly mathematical, deeply logical architecture of how classical Arabic constructs meaning from the absolute ground up.
It is mathematical.
We're going to look under the hood of one of the world's most intricate linguistic engines. We want to see how the gears turn.
Operating system is probably the most accurate metaphor we could use. And to really set the context for the specific source text we are analyzing today, it's vital to look at how it begins.
Right, the opening.
Yeah, because you don't just open this manuscript and immediately see a list of verbs. It opens in the traditional, time-honored manner of classical Islamic scholarship.
Which sets a very specific vibe.
It does. The very first words are the Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful.
Right.
It then follows with elaborate praises to Allah as the Lord of the worlds, and it sends blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, his family, and all his companions.
Wow.
And then finally, the author actually addresses the reader directly. He offers a prayer that God guides both the writer and the student to a complete, illuminated understanding of the material.
That really sets a tone. It feels like it elevates the study of language.
It definitely elevates it.
It takes it from being just a mundane academic chore to a deeply spiritual, almost vital pursuit. You aren't just learning rules.
You're seeking divine clarity.
Right, exactly.
The scholars who develop these systems view the mastery of language as the essential key to unlocking theology, law, and philosophy.
Which makes sense.
It does. And that brings up a crucial point for our discussion today. Throughout this foundational text, to illustrate these incredibly complex grammatical rules, the author naturally draws upon the literature that was the most familiar, the most pristine, and the most authoritative to that culture.
The highest standard of the language.
Yes. So as we break down these linguistic formulas, you are going to hear us mention examples taken directly from Quranic verses.
From the Hadith as well.
Right, the recorded sayings and traditions of the Prophet, and even quotes from foundational legal scholars like Abu Hanifa.
Right. And I want to take a moment to be absolute clear with you, our listener, about how we are handling this material.
Yes, very important.
As we go through these examples, some of which carry profound religious significance for billions of people, we're doing so entirely to report on the grammatical mechanics of the original text.
Just the mechanics.
We are looking at the syntax, the structure, the linguistic variables, and the rules being demonstrated. We are impartially conveying the concepts of the source material to help you understand the sheer brilliance of the grammar.
We're just looking at the code.
Exactly. We are not here to endorse, debate, or analyze any specific religious viewpoints or theological doctrines contained within those historical examples.
That's a vital distinction. We are studying the blueprints of an incredible architecture, and these specific historical and religious texts just happen to be the pristine bricks the author used to show us how the building stands up.
So where do we even begin with an operating system this vast? I imagine you can't just start building sentences right away.
You certainly can't. You have to start at the absolute lowest level of the code.
The binary level almost.
Exactly like binary. The text begins by taking any Arabic utterance, what it calls a lash, a sound that carries actual meaning, and dividing it into two massive, uncompromising categories.
Two categories.
It's a binary choice. An utterance is either single, which it terms mufrad, or it is compound, which is muakkab.
Single and compound.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the single, the mufrad. What makes up the basic atoms of this language?
The text states that a single word is divided into three absolute categories. Every single word in the massive Arabic dictionary, without exception, falls into one of these three buckets.
Only three.
Just three. First, you have the noun, or ism. Second, you have the verb, or fil. And third, you have the particle, or harf. That is the entire classification system for single words.
I have to say, it's beautifully minimalist at that level. Noun, verb, particle, it feels very clean.
It is very clean.
But of course, language isn't just single words floating around in a void. We communicate by combining them.
Yes, we do.
And that takes us to the second category of utterances you mentioned, the compounds, the murakabat. This must be where words start bonding together.
Yes, this is where words combine, forming either distinct phrases or eventually full sentences. And what the text does here is incredibly specific. It catalogs the exact types of phrases or compounds you can possibly build.
Like a blueprint.
Exactly. Analyzing these is crucial because it shows how Arabic begins to construct complex meaning before you even have a complete thought or a full sentence. It's categorizing the relationships between words.
What's the first relationship?
The first one the text brings up is the possessive compound, known as the idhafi.
Possessive compound. So we're talking about ownership here. The examples the text uses for this are pretty straightforward. It says a silver ring or the student's book.
Let's look closer at those, though. In Arabic, a silver ring is constructed as the ring of silver. The student's book is the book of the student.
Oh, so it flips it.
Yes. You have two nouns, and they are linked by a relationship of possession or material attribution. The second word anchors the first word to a specific owner or material. That bond creates the idhafi compound.
Makes sense. Two nouns bonded by ownership. What's the next type of bond?
The text then moves to the explanatory compound, the bayani. This is a structural bond where the second word in the compound exists for one specific purpose, to clarify, explain, or specify the first word.
Yeah.
And the author is so meticulous that he splits this explanatory compound into three distinct subtypes.
I love how granular this gets. It's like a taxonomy of human expression.
Mm-hmm.
The first subtype of this explanatory compound is the descriptive, the wasfi. The text uses a very classic example, the diligent student.
Right. You have a noun, the student, and then an adjective, diligent, directly describing it. That's a descriptive bond.
Simple enough.
But then look at the second subtype, the emphatic, or takidi. The text gives an interesting example here. The people came, all of them.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. Why is all of them considered a compound with the people? Why isn't it just part of the sentence?
Because of the function it serves. That phrase, all of them, is bonded to the people to lock down the meaning. So there is absolutely zero ambiguity.
Oh, I see.
If I just say the people came, you might wonder, well, did everyone come? Or just a majority? By adding the emphatic phrase, the language creates a fortified compound. It wasn't just some of the people, it was the entirety. The emphasis is structurally bonded to the noun.
That is fascinating. It's like the language has a built-in mechanism for legal precision.
It really does.
And then the third subtype of the explanatory compound is the appositional, the badali. The example the source uses is, Khalil, your brother, came.
In that sentence, your brother is the apposition. It's another way of identifying Khalil. The words Khalil and your brother refer to the exact same entity in the physical world.
They point to the same person.
Right. The language allows you to swap one identifier for another, placing them side by side to provide ultimate clarity. That swapping mechanism creates the Badali compound.
So under the umbrella of explanatory compounds, we have description, emphasis, and apposition. That covers a lot of ground. What other types of compounds are there?
Moving on from the explanatory, the text identifies the conjunction compound, the at-5.
Conjunction.
This involves words connected by a specific particle. The example provided in the manuscript is actually quite elaborate. It translates to, the male student and the female student receive praise and commendation if they persevere in study and diligence.
That's a mouthful. Where is the actual compound in all of that?
The core conjunction compound there is simply the male student and the female student, or praise and commendation. They are distinct nouns bound together by that little invisible tether, the word and.
Okay, now this next one is where I think things get truly wild from a historical perspective. The text talks about the blended compound, the Mazji.
Yes. This is where two entirely separate, independent words are essentially fused. They are melted together in the furnace of the language to become a single brand new word. The examples the author uses here are just brilliant.
The text lists Baalbek, Sibaway, and Bethlehem. Let's break those down because they aren't just random words.
No, they highlight deep historical linguistics. Take Baalbek, the ancient monumental city in Lebanon. That name is actually a fusion of two older words. Yes. Baal, which was the name of the ancient Canaanite deity, and Bek, which likely referred to the valley or the city itself. Over centuries, the people smashed those two concepts together into one unified grammatical unit, Baalbek.
And Sibaway, this one is almost ironic. That is the name of perhaps the most famous foundational grammarian of the Arabic language. He basically wrote the book on this stuff in the 8th century. But his name is a blended compound.
It is. It's originally a Persian name. It fuses sib, which means apple, and way, which means scent or fragrance. Scent of an apple. Two distinct nouns fused permanently into one proper name.
And the last one, Bethlehem, or as it's pronounced in Arabic, Beit Lam. Beit means house, and Lam means meat or flesh, house of meat. Again, two distinct words blended into a single compound noun that identifies a very specific location.
It shows how language absorbs history. Finally, to round out the compounds, the text lists the numerical compound, the adadi, but it specifies that this only refers to the numbers 11 through 19.
Why only those specific numbers? What happens at 20?
It has to do with how the numbers are constructed. In Arabic, to say the number 15, you don't have a unique word for 15. You literally take the word for 5 and the word for 10, and you place them right next to each other. Kamsata ashar.
5, 10.
Yes. The text notes that grammatically, there is an implied invisible and sitting between them. It is essentially 5 and 10. Because that and is implied but physically omitted from speech, the two numbers crash into each other and form a unique, permanent numerical compound.
And at 20?
Once you hit 20, the structure changes, so the compound rule no longer applies in the same way.
What's fascinating here is, sorry, I know that's your phrase, but looking at this list, possessive, explanatory, conjunction, blended, numerical, it reveals an incredible level of linguistic self-awareness.
You can use the phrase. What really is fascinating here is how Arabic categorizes the relationship between words before we even talk about verbs or sentences. I like to think of it like chemistry.
Chemistry, how so?
Before you can understand how a complex biological cell works, you have to understand how individual atoms form chemical compounds. A hydrogen and two oxygens bond covalently. Sodium and chlorine form an ionic bond. Arabic treats words the exact same way.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
It asks the speaker, how are these two words bonded? Are they bonded by ownership, by description, by historical fusion? Because the nature of that bond will dictate all the grammatical rules that apply to them down the line.
It builds meaning exactly like chemical compounds. A possessive bond reacts differently in a sentence than an emphatic bond. Okay, so we have our building blocks. We have our single words, nouns, verbs, particles, and we see how they form basic compound molecules. Well, let's zoom in on one of those atoms. I want to spend a significant amount of time looking at the noun, or the ism.
Welcome to the noun matrix. This is where the mathematical nature of Arabic really begins to show its teeth.
The text immediately takes all nouns and divides them into two massive camps. It says a noun is either declinable, which it calls murab, or indeclinable, which it calls mabni.
The flexible and the frozen.
Right. Now, for you listening, we need to clarify what these terms mean in practical terms. Declinable basically means the very end of the word changes its sound depending on what job the word is doing in the sentence. Indeclinable means the word is frozen solid. It looks and sounds exactly the same no matter where you put it or what it's doing.
Let's focus heavily on the declinable nouns first, the murab. This is where the vast majority of the language's complexity and beauty lives. The text explains that a declinable noun will exist in one of three distinct grammatical states.
3 states.
The vowel sound at the very end of the word will physically change based on its current job. Those 3 states are the nominative, the marfu, the accusative, the mansub, and the genitive, the measurer.
I am honestly marveling at the sheer volume of rules the text lays out for these states. It leaves nothing to intuition. It maps it all out perfectly. Let's take the nominative state first, the marfu. I like to think of these broadly as the doers, or the primary subjects of a sentence. If a noun is taking the lead role, it takes this state.
Yes, but the author provides an exhaustive, highly specific list of exactly what gets this nominative status. It's not just the active subject, it goes to the subject of an active verb, certainly, but it also goes to the passive subject.
Meaning what, exactly?
If you say, the student broke the glass, the student is the active subject. But if you say, the glass was broken, the glass becomes the passive subject. In Arabic, that passive subject is elevated to the nominative state.
Ah, I see.
Furthermore, the text states that in a nominal sentence, a sentence without a verb, both the subject and the predicate are nominative. So in the sentence, the sky is blue, both the word sky and the word blue would carry the nominative vowel ending.
But then it gets into these highly specific structural rules regarding particles. It says nouns also get the nominative state when they're connected to specific powerful little words. For example, it mentions the predicate of the particle ina and its sister particles,
Yes.
or the noun of the verb kana, or the nouns of the particles ma, la, in, and lida when they are used specifically to mean not.
This is a perfect example of the interlocking system we're talking about. You have a default rule. Subjects are nominative. But then you introduce a particle. Think of it as a tiny piece of overriding code, and it alters the state of the nouns around it.
It hacks the system.
Exactly. The text isn't just giving examples. It is laying out the complete matrix of logical conditions that result in a nominative ending.
Okay, so that's the nominative, the doers. But if you thought that list was detailed, the accusative list, the man sub, is on a whole other level of complexity. These are generally the receivers of action. But my goodness, the author goes into incredible detail about how many ways an action can be received.
It is a comprehensive map of how actions impact the physical and abstract world. How many categories does the text list?
I'll give you a sense of the scope. It says a noun is accusative if it is the absolute object, the direct object, the object of time or place, the object of reason, the object of accompaniment, the condition or state, which it calls hal.
The how, yes.
The specification, called tamyiz, or the exception, mustathna. And then, of course, it lists the reverse of the particle rules we just talked about.
Let's pause and really appreciate the nuance here. Think about all those different types of objects. In English, we rely heavily on prepositions to do this heavy lifting.
Right.
Let me give you some English examples. I hit the ball, that's a direct object. I traveled on Friday, that's an object of time. I stood up out of respect. That's an object of reason. We use words like on, out of, or for to explain the relationship.
So how does Arabic handle that without relying entirely on prepositions?
It can express all of those complex relationships simply by putting the noun into the accusative state. If you want to say, I traveled on Friday, you don't necessarily need the word on. You just take the word for Friday, you give it the accusative vowel ending, and the listener instantly knows that Friday is the container of time in which the traveling happened.
Wait, so if I want to say I stood up for a specific reason, like respect, the word for respect just takes that accusative ending?
Exactly. The text calls it the mafu lahu, the object of reason. You just say, I stood up, and then you say respect with an A sound at the end. The grammatical ending itself conveys the entire relationship. It's elegant, and it is incredibly dense with data.
That brings me to an analogy I was thinking about. To bring this all together and connect it to your perspective as an English-speaking listener, imagine if, in English, the word car physically sounded slightly different depending on whether you were driving it, buying it, or sitting inside it.
Oh, I like this. Walk me through it.
Okay, so if you were the subject doing the driving, taking the nominative state, you might say the karu is fast.
Karu.
If you were buying it, receiving the action, taking the accusative state, you might say, I bought the car. And if you were inside it, governed by a preposition, which leads us to our third state.
Yes, the genitive state, the major.
Right, so if you were governed by a preposition in the genitive state, you might say, I am sitting in the kari, karu, kara, kari. The word itself shifts its frequency to broadcast its job.
That is a brilliant analogy. That is precisely the level of data density happening in Arabic nouns. The ending of the word immediately broadcasts its function within the reality of the sentence. And as you noted, the text keeps the rules for that third state, the genitive, relatively simple.
Very simple compared to the others.
It says a noun takes the genitive state if it is triggered by possession, like our student's book example, or if a preposition is placed right before it.
So those are our three states for declinable nouns. But the text introduces a vital, almost sneaky concept here. The followers, or the tawabis.
I wouldn't call them sneaky. I'd call them highly efficient. The followers are words that don't have their own independent grammatical state. They don't have a specific job like subject or object. Instead, they just blindly copy the state of the word right before them.
They're grammatical chameleons. They just match the background color of whatever word is leading them.
That's a great way to visualize it. And the author identifies 5 specific types of these chameleon followers. Number 1 is the adjective, not. If the main noun is nominative, ar-kar-u, the adjective describing it becomes nominative. The fastu kar-u. It mirrors the state.
Makes sense.
Number 2 is emphasis, takid. We talked about the people came, all of them. All of them mirrors the state of the people.
What are the other 3?
Number 3 is the conjunction, matuf words connected by and or. If the first word is accusative, the word after the and must also be accusative.
Oh, wow.
Number 4 is apposition, badal, like our example with Khalil and your brother. And number 5 is the explanatory conjunction, at afbayan. They all function the same way. Look to the word on your right and copy its vowel ending.
It creates this beautiful auditory rhyming effect in the language where strings of related words all share the same ending sound. Now, remember earlier we said nouns are either declinable or indeclinable?
The flexible and the frozen.
We just spent all this time on the declinable ones, the ones that change shape like chameleons. The text then outlines the indeclinable nouns, the mabni. These are the rule breakers. These are the words that refuse to change their endings no matter what grammatical job they are doing.
The text specifies a very clear, rigid list of these frozen words. It includes pronouns, words like he, she, they, I, you. It includes demonstratives, words like this, that, these, those. It includes relatives like who, which. It also lists allusions or kinayat, certain verbal nouns, sound nouns, and specific adverbs of time and place.
Why would a language that is so obsessed with precision suddenly decide that a whole class of words gets a free pass to ignore the rules?
It comes down to cognitive efficiency. Think about pronouns, for instance. You use words like he or she constantly in speech. If the word he had to change its fundamental shape every time it switched from being the subject of a sentence to the object of a sentence, the mental processing power required to speak would be exhausting.
You'd never get a sentence out.
Exactly. They are structural words, not descriptive words. Therefore, the language freezes them. They are solid anchors in a sea of changing vowels.
Efficiency makes sense. Finally, before we leave the realm of nouns, the text categorizes them by their origin. It says nouns are either derived, which is mushtaq, or they are solid and non-derived, which is jamid.
This touches on the root system of Arabic, which is legendary. The derived nouns are mathematically generated from a core root action. The text lists things like active participles, the doer of an action, passive participles, the receiver, comparative nouns, words for bigger, faster, stronger, nouns of time and place, the specific time of writing, the specific place of writing, and tool nouns, the instrument used for writing.
And all of those would share the same root letters.
Exactly. If the root is katb, meaning to write, the active doer is a katib, writer. The receiver is maktub, a letter. The place is a maktab, a desk or office. The tool could be a miktub. They all share a root DNA. The solid nouns, the jamid, on the other hand, are the basic source words or infinitives. They are the raw, unshaped material from which all the others are derived.
It is a phenomenal system. Okay, so we've covered the nouns, we've looked at the actors and the props. Let's shift our focus to section 3, the engine of action. We're talking about verbs, or file.
If nouns are the actors on the stage, verbs are the script. They drive the narrative forward. They are the energy of the sentence.
The text categorizes verbs very cleanly, focusing entirely on time and intent. It lists the past tense, the present and future tense, the imperative, which it splits into commands with the letter lam attached and commands without it, and finally, prohibition, the negative command.
And just like it did with nouns, the author immediately divides these verbs into our 2 familiar categories: declinable, flexible, and indeclinable, frozen.
It's interesting how it applies the same logic.
Yeah.
The text states that past tense verbs and imperative verbs without the lam are permanently frozen. They are mabni. Their endings do not change based on what's happening around them.
There is a deep philosophy of time embedded in that rule. The past has already happened. It is unchangeable, immutable. Therefore, the grammatical structure of a past tense verb is frozen solid. You cannot alter its ending. It is a historical fact.
But the present and future verbs, the mudhari, they are flexible. There are murab. Because the present and the future are still unfolding. They can be changed by circumstances. And the text explains how their grammatical state changes based entirely on the particles placed before them.
Right. It says the default state for present tense verb is the nominative, just like a subject noun. But if you introduce a subjunctive particle in front of it, the verb switches to the accusative state. And if you put a jussive particle in front of it, it switches to a unique state called the jussive.
So unlike nouns that change based on their job, whether they are driving the car or being bought, verbs change based on their environment. The particles act as external triggers, flipping the verb switches. And the text notes that imperatives with a lam and prohibitions are strictly jossive because those specific command particles permanently force that state.
Precisely. The verb responds to the pressure of the words around it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I mean really interesting. The text moves into a concept called transitivity. This is all about how verbs demand objects. When we were prepping for this, you described it as the greed of the verb.
It is greed. How much information does the verb need to consume before its logical circuit is satisfied?
The text divides verbs into intransitive and transitive. The intransitive verb, the lazim, requires no object at all. It is entirely self-sufficient. The example the source text gives is beautifully simple. The time of prayer arrived.
Let's look at that. Arrived. The arriving happened, the time did the arriving, the action is complete, the sentence is over. The verb arrive doesn't need to act upon anything to make logical sense.
But the transitive verb, the muta'ati, is a different beast entirely. It demands an object. It reaches out and grabs a noun. And the text breaks this transitivity down into 3 escalating tiers of complexity.
Yes, tier 1, verbs that demand exactly one object. The text uses the example struck. Think about it. If I walk up to you and say, he struck, your brain immediately stalls. Your immediate question is, struck what? Struck whom? The verb struck is incomplete. It requires one receiver one, accusative noun to fulfill its meaning. He struck the table, now the circuit is closed.
Then we step up to tier 2, verbs that demand 2 objects. The text provides the examples knew and gave. Let's play out gave. If I say to you, I gave, your brain is missing 2 pieces of data. Gave what? To whom? The verb gave requires an object being transferred and a recipient of that transfer. 2 objects to satisfy the verb's core logic. I gave a student a book.
And then we reach the pinnacle, tier 3, verbs that demand 3 objects. The text uses the example informed, and I love this one because it really shows the complexity of the language.
How does inform require 3 objects? Walk me through that.
Let's build a scenario. I informed. First question, informed who? Okay, I informed the committee, object 1. Second question, informed them of what? I informed the committee that the data, object 2. Third question, what was the status of the data? Was corrupted. Object 3. The verb informed requires a recipient of the news, the subject of the news, and the predicate of the news. It requires 3 distinct pieces of accusative information to complete the grammatical circuit.
What's fascinating here is how verbs in Arabic aren't just descriptions of actions taking place in a vacuum. You called them directors on a stage earlier, and it fits perfectly.
They are absolute dictators on the stage. The moment you choose a specific verb, that verb looks at the script and dictates exactly how many actors or objects need to walk out from behind the curtain to complete the scene. The verb creates a grammatical gravitational pull that drags the necessary nouns into its orbit and forces them into the accusative state.
Gravitational pull is a great way to visualize it. Okay, so we've seen the nouns and the verbs. Let's look at what is manipulating that gravity. Section 4. The invisible directors. We are talking about particles, or harf, and the specific letters that attach to words.
If the nouns are the physical matter and verbs are the energy, the particles are the physical laws governing the universe. They are tiny words, sometimes just a single letter, that hold immense, sweeping power over the entire sentence.
The text divides particles into 2 fundamental camps, which makes understanding them much easier. We have operating particles, which the text calls amila, and non-operating particles, which are kir amila.
Let's focus on the operating particles first, the grammar changers. These are words that physically alter the declinable vowel endings of the nouns and verbs around them. They exert force. The text provides exhaustive lists here.
It really does. It categorizes them by what they do. First, it lists the prepositions. The text states there are up to 20 of them. We won't list all 20, but it includes words like min for from, ila for to, fi for in, ala for on. These are the operators of location and direction. And their operational rule is simple. They force the noun that immediately follows them into the genitive state, our kari ending.
Next, it lists the verb modifiers. We discussed earlier how present tense verbs are flexible and change based on their environment. Well, here's the environment. The text lists 4 subjunctive particles: an, lan, ke, itan. When one of these tiny words appears before a present tense verb, it reaches out and forces the verb into the accusative state. Then it lists the jussive particles. In, lam, lama, the lam of command and the la of prohibition. These force the verb into the jussive state, usually chopping off the final vowel entirely.
Then we have sentence modifiers. These are fascinating because they are particles that resemble verbs in their structure, but they act on whole nominal sentences. The text lists ina, ana, ka'ana, lakina, leta, and la'ala. Let's look at ina, which translates roughly to indeed or truly.
Inna is a massive power move in Arabic grammar. When you place inna at the very front of a nominal sentence, it reaches in, grabs the subject of that sentence, and violently forces it into the accusative state while keeping the predicate nominative. It flips the default rules just to add emphasis.
But the text notes a brilliant exception, a kind of linguistic circuit breaker. It states that if you take the tiny particle ma and attach it to the end of these words, so inna becomes inama, it entirely cancels their grammatical power.
I love the analogy you used for this during our prep. It's like turning off a powerful electromagnet just by sticking a piece of Scotch tape on it. The addition of ma neutralizes the particle. It loses all ability to change the endings of the words that follow it, and because it has been rendered harmless, it can now even be placed in front of verbs, which inna normally isn't allowed to do.
It's just incredible. Finally, for the operating particles, the text lists the vocative particles. These are words used for calling out to someone. Ya, haya. When you call out, these particles dictate the grammatical state of the name you are calling, depending on whether you are calling a specific person or a general title.
So those are the operators. They change the grammar. The second camp is the non-operating particles, the gai amila. These are the meaning makers. They add vital nuance, emotion, logic, and flow to the sentence, but they don't mess with the underlying vowel endings.
The text curates a whole variety of these. You have conjunctions like wa for and, fa for then, zuma for thereafter. You have alerting words like Allah and ha, which translate roughly to hey, pay attention. You have affirmations like nima and bala, meaning yes or indeed.
It also lists particles of urging, like hala and lala. Why don't you do this? Particles of expectation, like cod, which implies something has happened or might happen. Interrogation particles, like the hamza and how, which magically turn a declarative statement into a yes or no question just by sitting at the front of the sentence. And particles of deterrence, like kala, meaning absolutely not.
In addition to these standalone particles, the text highlights specific single letters that physically attach to the very ends of words to convey highly specific data.
Yes, these attachments are crucial. The text mentions the te of femininity. If it's a silent te and it's attached to the end of a past tense verb, it immediately tells you that the actor who performed the verb was female. If it has a vowel and is attached to a noun, it generally indicates the noun itself is feminine.
Then there's tanween. The text defines this specifically as a silent N sound at the very end of a noun. What's interesting is that it explicitly notes that this N is not used for emphasis. It's a marker of indefiniteness. It's the audio difference between saying the book and a book.
And contrasted perfectly with that, the text mentions the nun of emphasis. This is an N sound, either light or heavy, meaning doubled, that attaches specifically to verbs. The author states it is used in commands, prohibitions, questions, wishes, presentations, oaths, and even negations.
Why does a language need a dedicated letter just for emphasis?
Because of the culture of rhetoric. Arabic values force and certainty. This letter is purely there to inject psychological weight into the action. If I tell you to write something, it's a command. If I attach the heavy nun of emphasis to the end of the verb, it becomes an absolute, inescapable imperative. You must write.
Okay, I have to bring up the coding analogy you mentioned to me when we were prepping for this.
Yeah.
It perfectly explains how these particles function in the broader system.
If you think about programming a computer in Python or C++, you use logic operators. I, F, A, N, D, R, not D. These operators dictate how the code executes. The particles in Arabic, especially the operating ones, function exactly like these logic operators. A single particle placed at the beginning of a sentence can cascade grammatical state changes through the entire string of words that follows it. It executes a command that alters the physical sound of the sentence to encode a highly specific relationship.
It's a living algorithm. The nouns are the variables, the verbs are the functions, and the particles are the syntax running the script. And that script builds the ultimate structure, which brings us to Section 5, the grand architecture of sentences, the Jumla.
We've zoomed out from individual atoms to molecules to organs, and now we're looking at the entire organism.
The text outlines 4 foundational types of sentences. Number 1, the nominal sentence. or ismiya. This is built simply on a subject and a predicate. The example is Zaid is standing. Number 2. The verbal sentence, or filia, built on a verb and a subject. The example, Zaid stood. Number 3. The adverbial sentence, or zarfia, built on an adverb of time or place and its object. The example, I have wealth, which literally translates to with me is wealth. And number 4, the conditional sentence, or shartiya, built on a condition and a reward or consequence. The example, if you honor me, I honor you.
The author actually notes in the margins that technically adverbial sentences are just a subcategory of nominal, and conditional sentences are a subcategory of verbal. But for functional architectural purposes, treating them as 4 distinct styles makes sense for the student.
Now, once you have these sentence structures built, what do you do with them in actual conversation? The text gets incredibly philosophical here. It maps out 9 distinct functions or roles that a sentence can play within a larger dialogue. It's categorizing the psychological purpose of human speech.
I don't think we should list all 9, because that gets overwhelming. But let's dive deep into a few of the most fascinating ones using the examples provided by the source text. For instance, the second function it lists is justifying, or mu'allila.
A justifying sentence, so a sentence that gives the why for the sentence before it.
Exactly. The source uses a recorded hadith of the Prophet to illustrate this. Do not fast these days, for they are days of eating and drinking. The first sentence is a prohibition. The second sentence, for they are days of eating, justifies the command in the first. The language categorizes the relationship between the two thoughts.
Let's look at the third function because this one shows the poetry of the language. The parenthetical or interjecting sentence, the mutharitha.
This is a sentence dropped right in the middle of another thought. It is there to strengthen or beautify the main point, but it lacks direct grammatical dependency on the words around it. The text cites the foundational scholar Abu Hanifa. Intention in ablution is not a condition, but it notes that the phrase, may God have mercy on him, is inserted right after his name. That prayer is a parenthetical sentence. The text also references a line of classical poetry where a description of lances of a tribe, neither weak nor unarmed, interrupts the main narrative thought.
My favorite is function 4, resuming, or mustanafa. This is brilliant conversational engineering. It's a sentence that answers an unasked question that the speaker presumes the listener is thinking.
It anticipates friction. The example the text gives is a dialogue. Why is the word Zaid nominative? Because it's the subject. That second sentence, because it's the subject, resumes the flow by preemptively answering the question generated by the first statement.
Let's do one more. Function 8, circumstantial or halia. This describes the state or condition in which an action occurred. The example is highly visual. Zaid came to me while his father was writing.
Look at the mechanics of that. The entire second sentence his father was writing acts as a circumstantial wrapper describing the specific state of Zaid's arrival. It paints the background of the scene.
Okay, we've reached the pinnacle of this text, the ultimate aha moment. After defining all these words, all these particles, and all these sentence functions, the text introduces a concept that absolutely blew my mind, the concept of sentences with a place.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, everything we have discussed for the last hour about case endings, about nominative, accusative, and genitive states applying to single words, all of that was leading the student to this profound structural realization.
The text establishes a monumental rule. If an entire sentence, a full subject, verb, and object, can be logically swapped out for a single word, then that entire sentence takes on the grammatical state of that single word. It assumes the place of that word in the mathematical matrix.
Let's break that down so it's crystal clear. The text says there are exactly 7 types of sentences with a place. Let's look at a sentence acting as a predicate. If I say Zaid is reading a book, the phrase is reading a book is a complete verbal sentence on its own. It has a verb, a hidden pronoun, and an object. But in the larger context, it is sitting in the place of a single noun predicate. Therefore, that entire block of words is considered grammatically nominative.
It's like linguistic inception, a sentence inside a sentence. The text uses Quranic verses to show this in action impartially. For a sentence acting as a state or condition, which we know is an accusative job, it quotes Surah Yusuf, and they came to their father at night weeping. The single English word weeping is actually translated from a complete Arabic verbal sentence, they weep. Because it describes the state of their arrival, that whole mini-sentence is occupying the accusative place.
It also gives an example of a sentence acting as an object. Quoting Surah Maryam, he said, "Indeed, I am a servant of Allah." The entire sentence, "Indeed, I am a servant of Allah," is the direct object of the verb said. Therefore, that entire massive sentence is in the accusative place.
The text goes on to list the other types of sentences with a place, including sentences acting as a possessive, sentences acting as an answer to a conditional, sentences acting as an adjective, and sentences that are just followers, like chameleons, to another sentence that has a place.
And conversely, the text lists 9 types of sentences without a place. These are sentences that cannot be swapped for a single word, so they exist outside the matrix of case endings. They stand alone.
Like starting sentences, the text quotes Surah Al-Kawthar. Indeed, we have granted you Al-Kawthar. It has no grammatical place because nothing precedes it to give it a job. The list of sentences without a place also covers resuming sentences, parenthetical sentences, relative clauses, explanatory sentences, and the answer to an oath.
The logic is flawless. If a sentence cannot be compressed into a single noun's job, it does not receive a noun's state.
So what does this all mean? When you synthesize this entire manuscript, you realize that classical Arabic treats entire sentences like modular puzzle pieces. You can take a fully functional sentence with its own internal verbs and nouns and particles, shrink it down conceptually, and slot it into the grammatical place of a single noun within a larger macro sentence. The rules apply at the micro level of the word and simultaneously at the macro level of the clause. It's structural genius. It's fractal.
It is exactly fractal. The pattern at the smallest scale repeats identically at the largest scale. The rules that govern how a tiny particle affects a single noun are the exact same rules governing how an entire multi-clause sentence fits into a paragraph.
What a journey. To recap what we've covered today, we started at the microscopic level, looking at single nouns, verbs, and tiny particles. We looked at how words form compound molecules, how nouns change their endings based on their jobs, our karu, kara, kari, and how verbs act as greedy stage directors demanding a certain number of objects. We saw how particles act like computer code logic gates, flipping the grammatical state of the words around them. And finally, we zoomed out to the macroscopic level, seeing how entire sentences serve psychological functions in dialogue, and how whole clauses can modularly slot into the matrix of a single word. We've seen how classical Arabic relies on an interlocking matrix of rules to convey hyper-precise meaning.
And for you listening, I hope this deep dive fundamentally changes how you view language itself. When you look at a system like this, you realize language is not just a tool for casual communication or ordering food. It is an intricate, mathematically balanced ecosystem. Every word, every vowel ending, every invisible particle is carrying a load-bearing weight in the structure of human thought.
It's an architecture of the mind. And that brings me to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with to mull over. We just spent this time learning that in this language, an entire sentence can act grammatically like a single word, taking its place in the structural hierarchy through this deeply embedded fractal-like modularity. We know from cognitive science that the language we speak fundamentally shapes how we perceive reality. So if a person is speaking and thinking in a language that requires this level of instantaneous, multi-layered structural calculation, where the ending of a word changes based on a particle 3 words away, and where whole sentences are nested inside the conceptual space of a single noun, how might that change the way they mentally structure their reality? How might it affect how they break down and solve complex real-world problems? If your language is an algorithm, does your thought process become algorithmic?
That is a brilliant question. It really makes you wonder about the deep connection between syntax and systemic thinking. Does mastering a fractal language make you a fractal thinker?
Something for you to chew on until next time. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the invisible architecture of thought. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.